Thank you. As he said, my name is David Sirota. I am the founder of the investigative news outlet called The Lever, which you can all find at levernews.com. I also co-created the story of this recent film, which I hope at least some of you have seen.
There's a comet headed directly towards Earth.
We are prepared to mobilize in a historic fashion. Yo, what was that?
We're gonna need everybody's help on this.
The handsome astronomer.
Oh, gosh.
The pilot.
The richest human ever.
This comet contains $30 trillion of material.
What do trillions of dollars matter if we're all gonna die?
Oh, no, what if we're rich?
That would be terrible.
Directed by Adam McKay, rated R.
So, Don't Look Up was the, thank you. Don't Look Up was the second most watched film on the world's largest streaming platform, and it was nominated for multiple Academy Awards. It was literally seen by hundreds and hundreds of millions of people around the globe, and it resurfaced again this past week when this mashup went super viral across the internet. What you'll see here is a clip from the movie, and then a clip from a real news broadcast.
I'm sorry, are we not being clear? We're trying to tell you that the entire planet is about to be destroyed.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, it's, just something we do around here. We just keep the bad news light.
Right, it helps the medicine go down.
John, you're outside enjoying the sunshine. It's not too hot, is it?
No, it's absolutely lovely. It's, 20 degrees out here. It's perfect. But on a serious note, folks, by early next week, you can scrap 20 degrees. It could well be 40 degrees. I think there will be hundreds, if not thousands, of excess deaths early next week.
John.
The charts that I can see in front of me are frightening. So we all like nice weather, but this will not be nice weather. This will be potentially lethal weather for a couple of days. It'll be brief, but it'll be brutal.
Oh,
So,
John,
we can. Yeah.
So, John, I want us to be happy about the weather and every single. I don't know whether something's happened to meteorologists to make you all a little bit fatalistic and harbingers of doom. Because all of the broadcasts, particularly on the BBC, every time I've turned on anyone's talking about the weather, they're saying that there's going to be tons of fatalities. But haven't we always had hot weather, John? I mean, wasn't the summer of 76, that was as hot as this, wasn't it?
No.
Many of my friends sent me the clip last week, and I have to admit I was both gratified that our movie so perfectly illustrated reality so that we can be appalled by the reality of something like that. But I was also, I'll admit, I was super depressed by media outlets continuing to downplay the crisis, continuing to make it so difficult for scientists and experts to inform us about this crisis. And that's really what I think Don't Look Up is about. It's not just a tale of government and media's response to climate change or the pandemic or any other pressing crisis. Our film, at its core, is about something timeless. It's about the underdog. The underdog is the person or the cause that is righteous and good, but that's unfairly outmatched. Our film is the story of three scientists who become accidental underdogs in a fight to tell the world an indisputable truth. The comedy and tragedy of the movie is that they are underdogs when they shouldn't be. I had never expected to work on movies. It's not the life plot twist I ever expected. But if there would be one kind of movie that I'd be drawn to, it would definitely be the story of the underdogs. Let me just tell you a little bit about myself. I'm the grandson of underdogs. My grandfather escaped the anti-Semitism of the 20th century in Russia, crossed the ocean and arrived in America with no money. He scratched and clawed his way to a job helping lead one of the country's largest naval facilities. My other grandfather fought in World War II and was there as the United States liberated Europe. As a child growing outside of Philadelphia, I don't have as dramatic a story, but rooting for the underdog in Philadelphia is part of our hometown culture. The city is the home to the famous Rocky movies, the story of the working class boxer who becomes the world champion. Philadelphia is also a huge sports town obsessed with its professional sports teams, and I was obsessed with our professional sports teams. There's me with my hero, Charles Barkley. I was absolutely obsessed with Charles Barkley. He was always the underdog. He was a great player, but he was always, always, always the underdog to Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. Every year, they would do well and go into the playoffs with high hopes, only to see those hopes crushed. And my heart was broken. But the experience for me, as a kid, forged that kind of affinity with the underdog. And as a kid, there was nothing, I'll admit, there was nothing I wanted more than to be an NBA player. I understood the game, I was competitive, I practiced and practiced and practiced. I was the complete package, except for one little problem. I just wasn't very good at basketball. But as I grew older, I found another outlet for my competitive drive and my obsession with the underdog. The rough and tumble of American politics. When I graduated college in the late 1990s, I sent my resume to offices all over Washington. I didn't get many calls back, but I got one call back. I was demoralized, and the phone rang, and I was asked to come for an interview with a lawmaker I'd never heard of from a tiny state I'd never been to. And that lawmaker was Bernie Sanders. Hope many of you have heard of Bernie Sanders. That Bernie Sanders, the only independent in Congress, the man who somehow got himself elected to Congress, advocating for the little guy against the most powerful people on earth. I went to work as Bernie Sanders' spokesperson, and that was the mother lode of the underdog experience. I got to fight giant companies like IBM trying to cut their workers' pensions. I got to fight Wall Street trying to deregulate the economy. Bernie was like a character in our movie, yelling, screaming, shouting, truth to power inside a system that pretends to be a democracy, but that in reality, oftentimes, most of the time, is an oligarchy. And every now and again, we would scratch and claw our way to a victory. The entire experience of being inside that power system really changed my life. I was hooked. And I found my way back to the discipline I'd studied in college, journalism. Only I no longer wanted to be a sports writer about the NBA and Charles Barkley. I wanted to take down corrupt politicians of both parties. Journalism should not be the keep it light scene you just saw in our movie. At its best, journalism is a job whose entire mission is to speak for the underdog. There's the old saying that the journalist should comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And if you do it that way, it's a lonely existence because lots of powerful people end up hating you. I spent a lot of my time exposing how politicians were helping their corporate donors screw over their voters. The biggest set of stories I ever did was about a guy named Chris Christie. He was the governor of New Jersey. He ran for president. He was seen at the time as the most popular Republican in America and a likely presidential candidate. Nobody at that time wanted to report on his corruption because he was so popular. He was a bully, the ultimate Goliath. But me and my team at a small news outlet uncovered how he was using teachers, firefighters' retirement money to enrich the most powerful people on earth. And here's the thing, when our stories hit, Chris Christie held a press conference to personally attack me. Watch this video.
So no, there's no appearance issues or anything else. And the article that spurred all this conversation has been written by a guy who is a completely discredited journalist who's been fired for being inaccurate and inflammatory before. So, right now, anybody who can, pop up on a website calls themselves a journalist. David Sirota is not a journalist, he's a hack.
This was the greatest day of my life as a journalist. It was the best day of my life to hear a corrupt politician freak out at our reporting. Now, as I said, being the underdog, challenging the status quo, it's a lonely existence. And that's what I learned, and that's what I warned my wife about a few years later. Our area in Denver, Colorado, where I live, was represented by a state lawmaker who'd been voting with the oil and gas industry. She was working with a group of local citizens to try to find a candidate to run against him. And eventually, they asked her to run. And I encouraged her, but I told her the hardest thing in all of American politics is defeating an incumbent office holder. It almost never, ever happens. But she decided that our community needed a change so badly that she would take the plunge and run that underdog race. She launched the campaign at our local bar near our house. Nobody thought she would win. It was a grueling battle. I have a lot of the gray hair on my head from that campaign. It was endless weeks of door knocking and community events and meet and greets and small dollar fundraising. She was up against the entire Democratic Party machine. There were a lot of days, I can admit, it felt hopeless in our house. But in the end, win or lose, truly, it had become the greatest experience of our personal lives. Because what started as a campaign of a few people had become a huge army of volunteers by the end of that campaign. And she ended up pulling off an underdog miracle. She won a seat in the Colorado House of Representatives, where she once again found herself as an underdog, pushing climate legislation, fair tax legislation, all sorts of other legislation that challenge powers. And that's the thing about the life of the underdog. The battle never ends. There is no one singular victory. There is no instant gratification. The struggle never ends. But after so many years in politics and in media, in journalism, I have come to believe an axiom about that process of struggle that I want you to hear. Courage is contagious. When I go to rallies at the Colorado State Capitol, which is a major oil and gas hub in the United States, when I go there to demand that my wife and her colleagues take the climate crisis seriously and halt fossil fuel development in our state, I am deeply frustrated by the lack of action on this crisis, and I'm frustrated that those of us standing with science are still the underdogs. But I also know that the underdogs, we the underdogs, outnumber the oligarchs. And I know that we cannot let the difficulty of the struggle beat us down and make us give up. That's what power wants. They want us to give up. They want us to be sick of the toil of being an underdog. And I'd be lying to you if I told you I was always optimistic. At a moment when my country is facing a poverty and healthcare crisis, when so many countries are facing a democracy crisis, and when the world is facing an obvious existential climate crisis, yes, there are days when I don't want to struggle anymore, when I feel like giving up. There are days when I'm exhausted. I don't want to be on the side of the righteous underdog. There are days when I don't want to look up. But then on the wall in my office, that's the picture on the wall in my office, I look at this photo of my daughter meeting Bernie Sanders before I went to work as his speechwriter for his presidential campaign in 2020. During that presidential campaign, one of Bernie's most powerful speeches was the one where he talked about the need for solidarity, the need to fight for someone you don't know. I think about what will happen to my daughter a lot, and what will happen to her and her friends and every kid if we do not do that. I think about what happens to all future generations if the underdog gives up. And so my message today, the reason I came to this conference, it's this. If you're on the side of justice, economic justice, racial justice, climate justice, then here's the deal. You're going to feel like an underdog the rest of your life. You are going to be crapped on and berated and insulted. And the more success you have, the more brutal it will be. But you cannot give up. You have to keep speaking up, rocking the boat, trying to make change, and you have to expect that when you do, you will be attacked and you will be demonized because they want you to shut up. They want you to give up. But if you give up, my daughter's future is gone. If you give up, your family's future is gone. If you give up, our world is gone. And that cannot be an option. But here's the good news. The human story does not have to end like another Philadelphia 76ers season. And it doesn't have to end like the movie Don't Look Up. Our movie is not prophecy or destiny. Our movie is cautionary. And we, the underdogs, have the power to win. The greatest moments in the history of humanity are the moments of the underdog's triumph. Humanity itself is an underdog, a miraculous feat of biology and tenacity that crawled its way out of the primordial ooze to build civilizations. Each generation has been beaten back the worst and seemingly most powerful monsters. We've beaten disease and famine and pandemics. My own grandfather was here in Europe with many of your grandparents, defeating fascism when it seemed on the verge of a global takeover. And now the climate crisis is our generation's underdog challenge, a battle against the fossil fuel industry and its political machine that may be creating the greatest and most existential crisis in human history. But we are seeing a global movement for change that is emerging right now. We see it in lawmakers facing more and more pressure to act. We see it in the divestment movement. We saw it most recently in Washington this week, when hundreds of staffers in the Biden administration and on Capitol Hill publicly blew the whistle on their own bosses, demanding that Democrats who control the federal government stop surrendering on climate change. As I said, courage is contagious. And in this battle, we actually have the technology and the roadmap to win. Right now, renewable energy is cost competitive with fossil fuels. And in the case of solar, it's actually less expensive than carbon-emitting technology. That means we can create a whole new energy system that takes us off fossil fuels, and we don't need magic to do it. We can change our agriculture and food systems, as folks at this conference have made clear. We can change our transportation system and our supply chains to make them more sustainable. In this real-life episode of Mission Impossible, we don't get to choose whether to accept the mission. We have no choice if we're going to survive. We are underdogs because the opponents we face are so wealthy and powerful. We are the Charles Barkleys of my youth, and they are the Michael Jordans. They have armies of politicians and lobbyists and media outlets that not only block change, but try to make us all feel insane for even demanding change. They want us to become the Jennifer Lawrence character in our film, to depict the climate movement as insane for acknowledging the urgency of the threat before us. But even against these odds, our past tells us that we can triumph. That's what our history tells us, because the science and the facts and the morality of our cause are on our side. We can win. We can make sure the world finally looks up, as long as the underdogs don't give up. Thank you.
Speech and talk, and I have a question.
Yes.
For those out here that want to do something and sometimes maybe they are slightly afraid, how does it feel to dare and to actually see a realization of something that you dreamt and you dared of doing?
Well, to see the movie made, I was shocked to see the movie ever made. I mean, the story of how that happened, I'm a climate reporter. It's what I do. I report on climate. I published some stories, and I was talking to Adam McKay, who made the movie. And I said to him at one point, I don't understand why these stories don't seem to land. Why don't they seem to get people motivated? Why don't they seem to get even more coverage? And he was lamenting, and he was like, yeah, I know. And I said, you know, it almost feels like an asteroid's headed towards Earth and nobody cares. And he said, wait a minute. Maybe that's the climate movie we should do. So to see that idea then in movie form be seen by hundreds of millions of people? I mean, it really, still to think about it, it kind of blows my mind. But what really blows my mind about it is not just seeing very famous, amazing actors act out a story you helped create. Truly the best part of the movie, experience for me, was seeing it be seen by hundreds and hundreds of millions of people to support the movement. The movie was not about making a great movie. I mean, I'm glad it turned out great. The movie was about supporting the movement that we need to survive. That comet is coming. We can stop it. We absolutely can stop it, but we can't stop it if people give up.
Ladies and gentlemen, David Sirota, big thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.